Hello, my name is Zimu Lee, and I'm here to introduce you the second approach we use for our game recommendation system, the mean shift clustering method. According to Chen's 1995 literature about mean shift clustering, it's basically another kind of k-means clustering, but we don't have to define the number of cluster beforehand. Instead, we set a number of random cluster centers and set a radius to each cluster centers and use recalculation to mean method similar to k-means to find out how many center converge in the end and therefore have obtained the final cluster for the data set. The idea is that we set a radius to each initial cluster center. This radius is called the bandwidth. Then we recalculate the mean of each cluster center given their bandwidth. After number of iterations, some of the initial cluster center will converge, and that's when we say stop, because that's when we have all the cluster completed and we can see the result. So this is a figurative illustration of the mean shift clustering. As we can see here, there's a four random initial cluster center we give to this data set. And now we see, for example, this cluster has two data point within, so we calculate the means of these two data point and move the cluster. And eventually, these two cluster on the left side will converge to this one, and these two clusters on the right side will separate to these ones and give us the correct clusters. And now we'll implement this mean shift cluster method on our data set. First, we're going to use the data sets that's already has this dimension reduced to 3 dimensions provided by our PCA procedure above. And then we'll use the sklearn built-in function to estimate the optimal bandwidth. Here we see the optimal bandwidth for the PCA dataset is 10.05. And then we'll use the sklearn package provided tools to conduct mean shift. And after we conduct mean shift clustering on our dataset, we find out that there are four clusters. Then we'll visualize it. As you can see, this 3D graph is the visualized version of our cluster. There's four distinct clusters. After manual inspection of each clusters, we found out that the game is clustered not so much based on their genre, but based on its user rating count and price. We believe that this could be caused by our way to conduct PCA before the cluster, but generally the final cluster does make sense. For example, Sudoku and Sudoku Free has higher user rating counts and is clustered in a different cluster than the game Expert Sudoku. And these, even though these three games has identical name and identical genre, but based on its user rating count and price, the algorithm was successfully clustered them into different cluster and which benefit to our recommendation system. And to improve this clustering method, its implementation on our data set, we believe that we can potentially adjust the bandwidth and see if it gives us more clusters or it gives us less clusters.